The Indian Ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, a glistening mirror of sunlight and silence. For Sri Lanka's naval patrol team, it was just another ordinary day on duty. The hum of the ship's engine, the rhythmic crash of the waves, the distant cry of gulls, it was a familiar symphony they'd heard 1,000 times before. Life at sea could feel almost predictable, but that illusion was about to shatter. 10 miles off the coast, the team's radar picked up something strange, a massive, slow-moving object drifting aimlessly in the deep blue water. At first, they assumed it was just debris, maybe cargo fallen from a passing ship, but as they drew closer, confusion rippled through the crew. The object wasn't shaped like a container or a boat or anything they had ever seen floating out here before. "Sir, I think it's moving," one of the sailors said, squinting into the glare. The captain lifted his binoculars, expecting to see a piece of wreckage swaying with the tide. What he saw instead made his heart skip a beat. It wasn't debris. It was alive. And it was enormous. There, fighting against the waves, was an elephant. For a moment no one spoke. Their minds refused to make sense of it. Whales? Yes. Dolphins? Of course. Even sharks. But an elephant? Out here? In the middle of the ocean? Impossible. The captain barked orders. The ship turned sharply, cutting through the waves toward the struggling creature. As they got closer, the sight became even more surreal. The massive animal was paddling with all its strength, its trunk breaking through the surface every few seconds, like a snorkel as it gasped for air. The crew quickly pieced together what must have happened. The elephant had likely been trying to cross a lagoon or shallow river when strong currents swept it away. The tides around Sri Lanka could be unforgiving. A single misstep was enough to drag a full-grown elephant miles from shore. But even the strongest swimmer has limits. The crew could see it now. The animal's movements were slowing, its eyes half closed from exhaustion. Each time it lifted its trunk, it took longer to come back up. Panic set in among the sailors. If they didn't act soon, the elephant would drown before their eyes. "Call it in," the captain ordered. "We'll need backup." And the wildlife department. Within minutes, the radio crackled with replies. Another naval vessel was en route. Wildlife rescue experts were being dispatched by helicopter. The operation was already in motion, but time was slipping away fast. The sailors nicknamed the elephant Jumbo. Somehow, giving him a name made it personal, a reminder that this was no ordinary rescue. This was a fight to save a life. When the second ship arrived, the teams coordinated their plan. There was no way to lift a creature of that size on board. The only solution was to tow him, slowly, carefully, back to shallow waters. They prepared thick ropes and slings, looping them gently around Jumbo's massive body while keeping enough distance not to frighten or hurt him. The elephant, though terrified, seemed to understand they were trying to help. His deep, rumbling breaths filled the air as he floated beside the ships. And then the long journey began. The engines roared to life, and the convoy moved inch by inch toward the coast. The ocean was calm, but the task was monumental. They had to move slowly enough not to strain the elephant, yet steady enough to keep him afloat. Hours passed. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky gold and crimson. Jumbo's trunk rose weakly from the water every few seconds, taking deep, desperate breaths. The men aboard cheered every time they saw it. Each breath was a victory. By nightfall, fatigue had set in for everyone, but no one dared rest. Floodlights illuminated the sea as the ships pressed on. The crew refused to stop until they reached land. They knew that one wrong move, one broken rope, and all their effort would be lost. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the shore lights appeared in the distance, faint glimmers of hope in the dark. The rhythmic churn of the engines echoed through the night as the two ships moved in perfect harmony, dragging their precious cargo closer to safety. Salt spray stung the sailors' faces, but no one cared. Every man on board was fixated on the colossal figure in the water, Jumbo, the drifting giant who refused to give up. Each passing hour, the elephant's strength seemed to wane. His movements were slower now, and his trunk barely lifted above the surface. One of the sailors leaned over, the railing, voice trembling. "Sir, he's not going to make it if we don't get him in soon." The captain clenched his jaw. "He will make it," he said firmly, though even he wasn't sure. He looked at the exhausted faces of his crew, men who'd been at sea for days, but tonight were driven by something beyond duty. They weren't just soldiers, they were guardians of life. "Keep towing! Don't stop for a second," he ordered. The ocean roared, as if testing their resolve. The ropes strained, creaking under the weight of the massive creature, but the men held steady, adjusting the pull every few minutes. In the pale moonlight, Jumbo's eyes gleamed faintly, a mix of fear and trust. Somehow, he seemed to know he wasn't alone anymore. Hours later, the black of night gave way to the first hues of dawn. The horizon shimmered in pink and orange, and with it came a renewed sense of hope. The shallow waters of the lagoon were finally within reach. The captain shouted through the radio, "We're almost there! Hold position steady!" As the water grew lighter in color, the depth decreased. Jumbo's massive feet brushed against the sandy bottom for the first time in hours. He let out a deep guttural sound, half a trumpet, half a sigh. It was as if he understood that the worst was over. The crew erupted in cheers. Some clapped, others wept quietly, overwhelmed by the moment. The two ships slowed to a stop, and the rescue ropes were gently released. For a moment the elephant remained still, bobbing in the water as though too tired to move. Then, slowly, deliberately, Jumbo lifted his head high and began to wade toward the shore. Each step sent ripples through the calm lagoon. He stumbled once but regained his balance. The wildlife officers on the beach waited, ready to guide him the rest of the way. When Jumbo finally reached dry land, he paused, turned his head toward the ships, and let out a loud trumpet that echoed across the water. It wasn't fear, it wasn't distress, it was gratitude. The sailors stood on deck, silent, watching the majestic creature disappear into the trees. None of them spoke for several minutes. Words felt too small for what they'd just witnessed. The captain finally broke the silence. "Boys, that's something you'll tell your grandchildren." Back at the naval base, news of the rescue spread like wildfire. Photos and videos flooded social media, and soon the story made headlines around the world. Sri Lankan Navy saves drowning elephant in daring ocean rescue. Messages of praise poured in from every corner of the globe. Reporters wanted interviews, TV crews wanted footage, but for the men who were there, none of that mattered. What stayed with them was the image of Jumbo's trunk rising from the waves, a symbol of hope, of survival, of life's quiet determination to keep going even when the current pulls you under. Wildlife officials later confirmed that Jumbo had safely rejoined his herd deep in the forest. The naval crew visited the lagoon weeks later and found footprints leading into the jungle, proof that their giant friend was alive and well. Standing by the water's edge, the captain smiled faintly. "Right place, right time," he whispered, and perhaps it was more than that. Perhaps the ocean, vast and unpredictable, had simply chosen to test the limits of compassion that day, and humanity had passed.